The invitation was nothing short of surreal. A gilded card embossed with the signature of my enigmatic boss, Victor Hale. It read, "You are cordially invited to an exclusive gathering at Hale Manor this Saturday, 8 p.m. sharp. Formal attire is required. Attendance is non-negotiable." Victor Hale wasn't the kind of man you said no to. He was a self-made billionaire, known for his ruthless business tactics and a penchant for secrecy. As his personal assistant for 3 years, I'd been privy to his temper, his calculated moves, and his impossible demands. But this invitation, this felt different, intimate almost. It gnawed at me all week. I turned the invitation over in my hands repeatedly, hoping for some explanation in the blank space on the back. Nothing. My coworkers, who were quick to pry when it came to Victor's eccentricities, peppered me with questions I couldn't answer. "Why would he invite you to his house?" Julia from accounting asked over coffee. "He doesn't seem like the staff mixer type." "Maybe it's a reward," suggested Derek from PR. "You've been his secretary for, 3 years now? You deserve it, Evelyn." I nodded politely, but the doubts lingered. Victor never rewarded loyalty, not with kindness anyway. Everything he did was strategic, purposeful. That was what made the invitation so unsettling. What was his purpose this time? By the time Friday arrived, my unease had turned into a knot of anxiety. I stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the neckline of my sleek black dress, second-guessing every decision. Was this too formal? Not formal enough? The invitation had been vague, and Victor Hale was the kind of man who noticed details. The drive to Hale Manor did nothing to ease my nerves. The estate was on the outskirts of the city, perched atop a hill surrounded by dense woods. The narrow road wound endlessly through the trees, and the further I drove, the darker it seemed to get. By the time I reached the gates, I was gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached. A stone-faced attendant opened the wrought iron gates, motioning for me to proceed up the driveway. The mansion came into view moments later, a sprawling structure that seemed more fortress than home. Its tall windows were dark, and the faint light from inside cast elongated shadows across the immaculate lawn. "This way, Miss Harper," the butler at the entrance said, his tone clipped but polite. He led me through grand marble-floored halls, the sound of my heels echoing in the silence. Everything about Hale Manor exuded wealth and power, but it also felt cold, detached. The main hall, however, was anything but silent. As we entered, I was greeted by the hum of low voices and clinking glasses. Men in tailored suits clustered in groups, talking in tones too quiet for me to catch. But as I scanned the room, I noticed something strange. Every guest was a man. Not just any men, either. These were the elite politicians, tech moguls, media tycoons. Faces I recognized from magazine covers and primetime interviews. Their collective presence made the room feel charged, as though something monumental was about to happen. "Ah, Evelyn," came a voice from behind. I turned sharply to find Victor himself. He wore a dark suit that seemed to absorb the light, his sharp features as imposing as ever. "You made it." "Of course, Mr. Hale," I replied, forcing a smile. "But I didn't realize I'd be the only woman here." His smirk widened. "That's intentional." My stomach flipped. "What does that mean?" "You'll find out soon enough," he said, handing me a glass of champagne before striding off into the crowd. His departure felt abrupt, but I couldn't shake the feeling that his eyes were still on me, watching from a distance. I sipped my champagne and wandered the room, trying to blend in, but it was impossible not to feel out of place. Conversations stopped as I passed, and I caught glances that lingered a moment too long. It wasn't just that I was the only woman. It was as if my presence was part of some larger, unspoken plan. By 9 p.m., a bell chimed, cutting through the din. The men began filing out of the main hall, and before I could hesitate, Victor appeared at my side again. "This way," he said, placing a hand on my lower back. His touch was light but insistent, guiding me through a pair of heavy double doors. The room we entered was smaller but no less grand, a dining hall dominated by a long mahogany table. Candles burned in ornate holders, their flickering light casting strange shadows on the high walls. The table was set for a feast, but the food remained untouched, as if the meal was secondary to whatever business lay ahead. Victor pulled out a chair near the head of the table for me, then took his place at the very end. The other men took their seats as well, the atmosphere growing heavier with each passing moment. Once everyone was seated, a man I recognized as Senator Gray stood, raising his glass. "To power," he said, his voice commanding. "To power," the room echoed. I hesitated but eventually lifted my glass, the unease in my chest growing. Then the senator's tone shifted, growing darker. "Gentlemen, and our esteemed guest, tonight is a special night. Tonight, we solidify our legacy." A ripple of agreement passed through the room, the tension almost palpable. I leaned toward Victor, lowering my voice. "What's going on?" He gave me a small, inscrutable smile. "Watch." At the senator's signal, a side door opened. 2 men entered, dragging a third between them. My breath caught in my throat. The man they carried was bound and gagged, his face battered and bloodied. "What is this?" I whispered, my voice trembling. Victor didn't answer. Instead, he stood, commanding the room's attention. "This man," he said, his voice cold and deliberate, "has violated our trust, and Evelyn Harper will decide his fate." "What?" I froze as Victor turned to me, producing a gleaming dagger from the table. He held it out, the blade catching the light like a shard of ice. "Prove your loyalty," he said simply. Every eye in the room turned to me, their gazes expectant, hungry. The bound man let out a muffled cry, his wide eyes pleading for mercy. My heart raced, and my palms grew slick with sweat. "Victor, I can't." "You must," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This is your moment, Evelyn. Do it or—" He trailed off, but the unspoken threat hung in the air like smoke. I stared at the dagger, the weight of the moment crushing me. The man's muffled cries grew louder, his desperation cutting through the suffocating silence. My breath hitched, and I realized that this wasn't a test. This was real. "Choose," Victor said, his voice cold as steel. The weight of Victor's words hung in the air, as sharp and deadly as the dagger in his hand. The room seemed to close in around me, the flickering candlelight casting distorted shadows on the walls. My pulse roared in my ears as every gaze in the room bore into me. I felt like prey surrounded by predators. Victor took a step closer, holding the dagger out to me. His expression was calm, calculated, but his eyes held an intensity that made my stomach churn. "Evelyn," he said, his voice smooth but unyielding, "this isn't just about him, it's about you. About proving that you belong here." "I don't belong here," I snapped, my voice trembling. "I'm your secretary, not whatever this is." The bound man let out a muffled cry, thrashing against the 2 guards holding him. His face was a mask of terror, and I couldn't bring myself to meet his pleading eyes. Victor tilted his head, his lips curling into a faint smile. "You're more than a secretary, Evelyn. You're a part of my world now. And in my world, loyalty is everything. Loyalty doesn't mean murder." I hissed, my voice barely above a whisper. Victor's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. "This isn't murder. It's justice." "Justice for what?" I demanded, my voice cracking. He gestured to the man on the floor. "This man betrayed us. He sold secrets, secrets that could destroy everything we've built. He jeopardized the lives of everyone in this room. And now you have the chance to make it right." I looked around the table, searching for some sign of dissent, some shred of humanity in the eyes of these powerful men. But their expressions were unreadable, their silence deafening. They were waiting, expecting me to comply. Victor pressed the dagger into my hand, his grip firm but not forceful. Evelyn, you're stronger than you think. Show them. Show me. My hands shook as I held the blade, its cold metal biting into my palm. The man's muffled cries grew louder, more desperate. I felt sick, my stomach twisting into knots. This isn't who I am, I whispered, my voice trembling. Victor leaned in, his breath warm against my ear. It's who you need to be. The room was silent except for the crackling of the fire and the faint, panicked breathing of the bound man. My mind raced, grasping for a way out, but there was none. The door was closed. The eyes of the council were fixed on me. And Victor had locked me in a game I didn't know how to play. Then a thought struck me. Maybe I didn't have to play his game. Maybe I could rewrite the rules. I tightened my grip on the dagger, my knuckles turning white. My gaze shifted from the blade to Victor, whose expression remained calm but watchful. He was testing me, pushing me to my breaking point. But if he thought I would crumble, he was wrong. Fine, I said, my voice steadying. If this is about loyalty, I'll prove mine. Victor's lips curved into a satisfied smirk. Good. I stepped forward, the dagger feeling heavier with each step. The bound man flinched, his muffled cries turning into frantic, incomprehensible pleas. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. I raised the dagger, my hand trembling, and I slashed the ropes binding him. The room erupted into chaos. Gasps and shouts filled the air as the man collapsed to the floor, his arms free. I turned to face Victor, my chest heaving. This is who I am, I said, my voice firm. And if you can't accept that, then I don't belong here. Victor's smirk faded, his expression hardening. For a moment, I thought he might retaliate, but then he did something I didn't expect. He laughed. It wasn't a warm laugh or even an amused one. It was cold, calculating, a laugh that sent chills down my spine. Well played, Evelyn, he said, his voice laced with approval. I knew there was more to you than met the eye. What the hell is that supposed to mean? I demanded, still clutching the dagger. Before he could answer, the man I had freed lunged for the door, his cries muffled by the gags still in place. He didn't make it far. 2 guards intercepted him, pinning him to the ground. Victor held up a hand, and the guards froze. Let him go. The room fell silent, the tension palpable. The guards exchanged uncertain glances but released their hold. The man scrambled to his feet, his eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. Victor stepped closer to him, his gaze cold and unrelenting. Run, he said softly. Let's see how far you get. The man hesitated for only a moment before bolting for the door. No one stopped him. No one moved. The only sound was the rapid thud of his footsteps fading into the distance. Victor turned to me, his expression unreadable. You surprised me tonight, Evelyn. Did I pass your twisted little test? I shot back, my voice filled with anger. You proved you have a spine, he replied. That's more than I can say for most people in your position. This isn't over, I said, my voice shaking but resolute. Whatever this is, I'm going to find out. Victor's smirk returned, faint but unmistakable. I look forward to it. As the meeting dispersed, I left Hale Manor feeling more confused and determined than ever. Victor had revealed a side of himself I didn't recognize, and the stakes were far higher than I had imagined. But one thing was clear. I wasn't just a pawn in his game. I was a player, and I intended to win. The drive home from Hale Manor was a blur. My mind raced with questions, doubts, and the lingering image of Victor's calculating smirk. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had passed some invisible threshold, stepping into a world that didn't care about rules, morals, or even lives. But what disturbed me most was how Victor looked at me after I freed the man. Like he was proud of me, like he'd won something. The following day, I arrived at the office, determined to maintain a sense of normalcy. If Victor wanted me to be part of his shadowy games, I would play along for now. But my plan to keep my head down unraveled the moment I walked into my office. A sleek black box sat on my desk, tied with a crimson ribbon. A note was perched on top, written in Victor's precise handwriting. For your loyalty. Congratulations on passing your first test. My chest tightened as I stared at the box. I wanted to throw it out the window, but curiosity got the better of me. Slowly, I untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside was an ornate key, its surface etched with intricate patterns. Beneath it was a card bearing a single line. Tomorrow, midnight, the vault. The vault. I'd heard whispers about it in the office. An exclusive lounge owned by Victor, hidden somewhere in the city. It was said to be a place where only the most powerful met, where deals were made and secrets exchanged. But no one seemed to know exactly where it was. By the time midnight rolled around the next evening, I found myself standing in front of an unmarked steel door in an alleyway downtown, clutching the key with a mix of trepidation and determination. A small camera above the door whirred to life, scanning my face. The door clicked open. The vault was everything I had imagined and more. The air was thick with the scent of cigars and expensive liquor. The walls were lined with dark leather and gilded mirrors that seemed to reflect more than just your image. They reflected your ambition, your fears. Victor was waiting for me at the bar, his demeanor as calm and commanding as ever. "Welcome, Evelyn," he said, gesturing to the seat beside him. "I wasn't sure you'd come. Did I have a choice?" I replied, slipping onto the stool. "There's always a choice," he said, his smirk returning. "But I'm glad you made the right one." Before I could respond, a server appeared, setting down 2 glasses of amber liquid. Victor raised his glass. "To survival." I hesitated, then clinked my glass against his. The liquid burned as it slid down my throat, but the fire in my chest was nothing compared to the intensity of Victor's gaze. "I know you have questions," he said, leaning back. "Ask." "What is this?" I asked bluntly. "The order, the tests, the man last night. What are you trying to prove?" Victor swirled his drink, watching the liquid catch the light. "The order is about power," he said. "Not just having it, but wielding it, controlling it. You proved last night that you understand the first rule of power. Mercy is more dangerous than violence." "You think freeing that man was mercy?" I asked, incredulous. "Of course not," Victor said, his tone sharp. "It was strategy. You let him go, but in doing so, you forced him to reveal himself. Do you know where he is now?" I shook my head. "Dead," Victor said flatly. "We had him followed. He ran straight to one of our enemies, hoping for protection. Instead, he confirmed everything we needed to know." The room seemed to tilt as his words sank in. "You used me," I said, my voice low. "I tested you," Victor corrected. "And you passed, which is why you're here." Before I could process his words, a man approached our table. He was tall, broad-shouldered, and exuded the kind of confidence that came from years of command. "Evelyn Harper," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I've heard a lot about you. Who are you?" I asked warily. He extended a hand. "Matthew Steele, Security Director for the Order." Reluctantly, I shook his hand. His grip was firm but not crushing, his dark eyes scanning me as if searching for weaknesses. "She's sharp," Matthew said to Victor. "I can see why you brought her in. But does she know what's next?" Victor's smirk widened. "Not yet. Next," I repeated, my pulse quickening. "What's next?" Matthew glanced at Victor, who nodded slightly. Then he turned back to me, his expression serious. "Victor may have recruited you, but if you want to stay, you'll need more than his endorsement. You'll need to prove yourself to the council." "The council?" I echoed. "The governing body of the order," Victor explained. 12 members, each holding the keys to the most powerful industries in the world. They decide who stays, who goes, and who rises. "And how do I prove myself?" Matthew leaned closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There's a leak. Someone within the council is working against us. Your job is to find out who." My heart sank. You expect me to investigate your inner circle? I don't even know these people. That's precisely why you're perfect, Victor said. You're new, unconnected. No one will suspect you. Before I could argue, the lights in the room dimmed, and a low chime sounded. Victor rose from his seat, extending a hand to me. It's time, he said. For what? For you to meet the council, he replied. His voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Was it anticipation or something darker? I followed him through a hidden door at the back of the lounge, my mind racing. I had no idea what awaited me on the other side, but one thing was clear. I was in too deep to turn back now. The hidden door led to a staircase spiraling downward, the air growing colder with each step. The faint hum of voices drifted up from below, growing louder as we descended. Victor walked ahead of me, his posture as casual as if he were heading to a board meeting. But I could feel the tension radiating from him, a sharp edge beneath his calm exterior. At the bottom of the stairs, another door awaited, steel and unmarked, with a biometric scanner embedded in its surface. Victor pressed his hand against the scanner, and after a soft beep, the door hissed open. The room beyond was unlike anything I had imagined. The walls were lined with monitors displaying live feeds from around the world, boardrooms, government chambers, bustling city streets. A long, black table dominated the center of the room, surrounded by 12 high-backed chairs. 11 were occupied. Each person at the table exuded power, their expressions varying from bored to calculating as they turned their gazes to us. Evelyn Harper, Victor announced, his voice steady. Meet the council. My heart pounded as I stepped forward, their eyes weighing me like I was an investment to be scrutinized. A woman with sleek silver hair and an air of authority tilted her head, her piercing gaze locking onto mine. She looks ordinary, she said, her voice cool. Are you sure about this, Victor? She's proven herself, Victor replied, his tone leaving no room for argument. Proven herself? Scoffed a man at the far end of the table, his suit crisp and his smile razor-sharp. By freeing a traitor? Hardly impressive. She forced the traitor to reveal his alliances, Victor said evenly. Without her, we'd still be in the dark. The man's smile didn't falter. Or perhaps she just got lucky. I clenched my fists, heat rising in my chest. If you think luck had anything to do with it, maybe you should try putting your life on the line. I snapped before I could stop myself. The room fell silent. My pulse roared in my ears as I realized what I had just done. But instead of reprimands, a low chuckle broke the tension. It came from the woman with silver hair, her lips curving into a faint smile. Fiery. I like her, she said. Perhaps she's not as ordinary as she seems. Victor's lips twitched in amusement, but he said nothing. The meeting began with little ceremony, though every word exchanged carried a weight that made my head spin. The council discussed global markets, political maneuvers, and military contracts as casually as others might discuss the weather. It was like watching a chess game, each move calculated, every decision rippling across industries and borders. Then the conversation shifted. The leak, said a man with a gravelly voice, his scarred hands resting on the table. We need it contained. Now, all evidence points to someone within this room, Victor said, his gaze sweeping over the council. Which is why Evelyn will be conducting the investigation. The room erupted into protest. Are you insane? She's an outsider. This is unacceptable, Victor. Victor raised a hand, silencing them. She's the perfect candidate. No one here has ties to her. She's impartial. She's inexperienced. The man with the sharp smile argued. And if she fails? She won't, Victor said firmly. The room quieted, though the tension remained thick. The silver-haired woman leaned forward, her expression curious. And if she finds the leak? Victor's eyes met mine. She decides their fate. As the meeting ended, the council members filed out, their conversations muted but their distrust palpable. I remained seated, trying to process what had just happened. Victor approached, his hands tucked casually into his pockets. "You set me up," I said, my voice low. "You're smarter than you give yourself credit for," he replied, his tone almost amused. "And you handled them well." "Handled them?" I was nearly torn apart. Victor smirked. "And yet, here you are, still standing." I stood, crossing my arms. "What happens if I find the leak?" "You already know the answer to that," he said. "This isn't a game, Evelyn. If the leak isn't dealt with, the Order's entire foundation crumbles." "And what about me?" Pressed. "What happens to me when this is over?" Victor's smirk faded, replaced by an unreadable expression. "That depends on how well you play your hand." The following days were a blur of shadows and whispers. Victor gave me access to everything: the Order's files, their surveillance networks, even dossiers on the council members. Each one was a titan in their field, with more influence than I'd ever imagined. Yet, beneath their polished exteriors, secrets lurked. Late one night, as I pored over the data in my apartment, I stumbled across something chilling. A series of encrypted messages buried deep in the Order's communication logs. The messages were brief but damning, detailing sensitive information about the Council's dealings. They had been sent to an unknown recipient, and the encryption signature matched one of the Council members. My stomach churned as I decoded the signature. It pointed to none other than the silver-haired woman, Eleanor Graves. I stared at the screen, disbelief washing over me. Eleanor had been one of the few who hadn't openly opposed my presence. She had even defended me. Could it all have been an act? Before I could dig deeper, a knock at my door startled me. My heart leapt into my throat as I glanced at the clock. It was nearly midnight. I approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" "It's Victor," came the reply, his voice calm but firm. "We need to talk." I opened the door to find him standing there, his expression unreadable. "How did you know where I live?" I asked, stepping aside to let him in. "I know everything about you, Evelyn," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "That's why I chose you." "Well, you might not have chosen wisely," I said, crossing my arms. "I found something." Victor's eyes narrowed slightly. "What did you find?" I hesitated, my instincts screaming at me to be careful. But before I could respond, the lights in my apartment flickered. Then, without warning, everything went dark. "What the—" I started, but Victor grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the window. "Stay quiet," he whispered. Footsteps echoed in the hallway outside, heavy and deliberate. My breath hitched as I realized we weren't alone. Victor's grip on my arm was firm but not painful as he led me toward the back of the apartment. My heart raced, the sound of approaching footsteps growing louder. Whoever was outside wasn't trying to be discreet. They wanted us to hear them coming. "Window," Victor whispered, gesturing toward the fire escape. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered, but he didn't answer. Instead, he nudged the window open and climbed out, his movements surprisingly agile for a man who usually commanded rooms, not fire escapes. I followed, my dress snagging slightly on the frame. As soon as my feet hit the metal grating, I froze. Below us, a black SUV idled, its headlights off. A man leaned against the hood, speaking into a device clipped to his lapel. He glanced upward, and our eyes met. "We've been made," I hissed. Victor didn't waste a second. He grabbed my hand, pulling me down the fire escape as the man shouted something I couldn't make out. A door slammed, and footsteps thundered after us. "Move!" Victor barked. We hit the alley running. My heels clattered against the pavement until Victor, with an exasperated growl, yanked me aside and snapped them off. I didn't protest, too focused on the sound of pursuit. We darted through narrow alleys and empty streets until we reached a nondescript sedan parked under a flickering streetlight. Victor yanked the door open and pushed me inside before sliding into the driver's seat. The car roared to life, and we sped away just as the black SUV turned the corner behind us. For several minutes, the car was silent except for my labored breathing and the hum of the engine. Finally, I found my voice. Who were they? Order enforcers, Victor said grimly, his hands gripping the wheel. Not sent by me. Eleanor, I guessed. Victor didn't respond, which was answer enough. She knows I found something, I pressed. The encrypted messages. She must have sent them. It's not just the messages, Victor said, his tone sharp. You're a threat now, Evelyn. To her, to the council, to everything. I stared at him, anger bubbling up. I didn't ask for this, Victor. You're the one who dragged me into this insane game. And you're better at it than I expected. He shot back. That's the problem. Victor's evasive driving eventually lost the SUV, and he pulled into an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city. The place reeked of oil and damp concrete, and the flickering fluorescent lights did little to make it feel less oppressive. Why here? I asked as he parked. We need time to think, he replied, stepping out, and to plan. Inside, Victor produced a tablet from a hidden compartment in the car and pulled up a live feed. It showed Eleanor Graves, seated at a desk in what appeared to be her private study. She was speaking to someone off-screen, her expression as calm and collected as ever. She doesn't look like she's panicking, I observed, my voice tinged with bitterness. She won't, Victor said, his gaze fixed on the screen. Not until we make her. The next few hours were a blur of strategizing. Victor explained that Eleanor had been using the Order's resources to build her own network, siphoning funds and information to rival factions. The encrypted messages I found weren't just leaks. They were part of a larger plan to dismantle the council from within. If she succeeds, the Order collapses, Victor said, his voice tight. And the world follows. I wanted to argue, to say he was exaggerating, but deep down I knew he wasn't. I'd seen enough in the past few days to understand the kind of power the Order wielded, and the chaos it could unleash if left unchecked. What's the plan? I asked, my resolve hardening. Victor's smirk returned, faint but unmistakable. We make her believe she's won. The plan was risky, bordering on reckless. Victor and I would confront Eleanor at her estate, presenting her with fabricated evidence that another council member, Jonathan Crane, the man with the sharp smile, was plotting against her. The goal was to provoke her into revealing her hand. She's too smart for this, I warned as we drove to her estate. What if she sees through it? Victor glanced at me, his expression unreadable. Then we'll deal with her another way. I didn't ask what he meant by another way. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. Eleanor's estate was as grand as Hale Manor, though darker, more imposing. Her staff led us to her study, where she waited with a glass of red wine in hand. She greeted us with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Victor, she said, her tone smooth, and Evelyn, to what do I owe the pleasure? Victor wasted no time, launching into his fabricated story about Crane's betrayal. Eleanor listened, her expression betraying nothing. But as Victor handed her the evidence, her grip tightened ever so slightly. You've been busy, she said, her gaze flicking to me. Impressive, Evelyn. But I wonder, she trailed off, her smile widening. Before I could react, a sharp click echoed through the room. Eleanor had drawn a gun, aiming it squarely at Victor. I wonder, she continued, if you truly think I'm that naive. The next moments were a blur. Victor moved first, knocking the gun aside as the shot rang out. Chaos erupted. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy paperweight, and swung it at Eleanor, catching her arm. She stumbled, and the gun clattered to the floor. Victor was on her in an instant, pinning her down. It's over, Eleanor. She laughed, blood trickling from the corner of her mouth. You think this changes anything? The council will turn on you. On her. Victor leaned closer, his voice a low growl. We'll see about that. By the time the council convened the next day, Eleanor's betrayal was laid bare. Victor presented the real evidence, exposing her plans to dismantle the Order. The council's verdict was swift and brutal. Expulsion, with the implicit understanding that expulsion from the Order often meant far worse. As Eleanor was escorted out, she locked eyes with me one last time, her gaze burning with a promise. This isn't over, Evelyn. In the days that followed, Victor offered me a formal position within the order, an opportunity to rise in its ranks. I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on me. You've already proven you belong, Victor said. The question is, do you want the power that comes with it? I looked at him, remembering everything I'd seen, everything I'd done, and I realized the choice was already made. I'll stay, I said, my voice steady, but on my terms. Victor's smirk returned, and for the first time, I saw something close to admiration in his eyes. Welcome to the game, Evelyn.